Welcome. Our presentation is heavily based on treating traumatic stress in children and adolescents. This is a book by Margaret E. Blaustein and Christine M. Kinneberg. It's available through Guilford Press and other retailers. We do talk about a couple of other models that are very similar to their ARC model. Also want to acknowledge that this book was part of a book study that was voluntary, that was put together by Laura Colon Feliciano, who is a licensed clinical social worker with the Schenectady City School District, who arranged this for us. We would not be here today if she had not brought all of us together to increase our knowledge of working with students who have experienced trauma and best clinical practices. So wanted to start out very briefly to talk about how we're going to be looking at not just Blaustein and Kinneberg's work, but we're also going to talk a little bit about Bruce Perry's work with trauma and things that would inform your daily interactions with students that we work with to ensure trauma sensitivity. We're primarily focusing on school-based practices, even though there's a lot of things that we could talk about that would be more clinical in nature. That is not what this presentation will be focusing on. We're going to look at activities to build executive functioning skills. By the end of the presentation, we want you to be able to clearly identify ways to build executive functioning skills in children through everyday interactions and activities. We want you to be able to have the resources and activities that you can use in a school setting, whether you are a teacher, a paraprofessional, a bus driver, a lunch monitor, a hall monitor. There are different ways we can all support our students in their growth and learning. So this is the pyramid model for integrating trauma recovery. Very briefly, the base of that is having an effectively trained workforce. And we are part of that workforce. And this conference is helping us to get those skills that we need to be constantly improving our practices. We've talked about tier 1, 2, and 3 before, and the models that we're looking at line up with tier 1 is that attachment, that we're doing that with every student. We need that as a basis to our relationships. Tier 2, more of that prevention, where students that need those additional skills for regulation, we are teaching them, we are working with them on. Whereas tier 3, we're trying to help students that are having difficulty integrating because we have good staff training, attachment with our students, have worked on the regulation, we can help them to enhance their skills so they are able to better function in the world and our learning environment. The next slide talks about our relationship being a foundation with our students. Wanted to first talk a little bit about Bruce Perry's work. He's a psychiatrist who's focused his research and practice on childhood trauma and how to assist children who have experienced adverse childhood events using therapeutic, educational, and enrichment activities. He's looking at a neurosequential model to inform treatment, which is focusing on attachment and regulation. You're noticing a theme here, to move to higher level brain functioning. Prior to being with the Schenectady City School District, I worked with an agency that spanned a continuum of residential, school-based day treatment, community-based interventions, and outpatient counseling, in addition to foster care and using some functional family therapy. They took Bruce Perry's model and really looked at how can we bring in some of the regulation. So there's a lot of relationship building, but we had drum circles, we had horseback riding, we had pet therapy. There was a lot of things that were working under the neurosequential model of assessing a student or client where they were and then seeing what strengths they needed to build and then reassessing to see if they had progressed. But we can't do that in a school environment. We're not a clinical setting. So that's where the ARC model, looking at attachment, regulation, and competency that was developed by Margaret Blaustein and Christine Kinneberg, is really a way that we can look at traumatic stress in children and adolescents and focus on the adaptation they have into a school setting. This trauma-based framework is highly relevant for the students we work with. We primarily use this model to inform our methods for strengthening executive functioning skills. You'll notice that attachment is the foundation to support the child, whereas executive functioning is a higher level process, which can turn on if we support a student appropriately. So the ARC framework, looking at executive functioning, in some ways, it's similar to Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You need to have that strong foundation and continue advancing skills until you have built a whole strong house. Different agencies, supports, and school staff can contribute to the base of the ARC framework for that attachment and regulation, working towards more competency. For example, the YWCA in Schenectady is using the framework in their work with women and children. In our schools, our teachers set up routines and rituals in the classrooms. Parents work independently or with providers on their own affect management, attunement to their child, and responding effectively to the child or adolescent's needs. For those of you that have been trained in TCIS, which I know is very supported within our district, TCIS looks at adult affect management in the form of the 4 questions. So that's something we can be asking ourselves ongoing to be prepared when we go into work with our students in any situation. Our staff and community therapists also work with students on identifying feelings and techniques to respond to their feelings. The supports we provide over the course of a student's development directly impact their executive functioning. It impacts their connection to others and their development of identity and their sense of self. The framework echoes a lot of Bruce Perry's work. Both are evidence-based and focus on what children, adolescents need to develop optimally. The foundational strategies we're looking at are engagement, routines, and education. You notice this pattern here. So these are the key strategies. A child is only as regulated as their caregiving system. So if we as staff and teachers and parents, as many of us are not regulated ourselves, we have a lot of difficulty working with our students and helping them with their executive functioning. We want to support a student's active engagement in their present life, supporting areas of functioning that still need development. This ties in very well with what we know for classroom management strategies, build the relationship, have the routines, and then when safe, a child learns. Now we're moving this into thinking about trauma experience integration. So many of our students have experienced trauma. Both ARC and Perry's neurosequential model look at the capacity to first survive and tolerate moments of overwhelming distress and arousal that can be brought on by real or perceived experiences of danger in the world. This is something that develops over time. We want to engage our curiosity, reflect on those states, and be able to engage these developmental capacities, tolerating experiences, negotiating relationships, making active choices, developing a healthy and cohesive understanding of the self and others. And this is purposeful action in the present moment. I'm going to pass off to Asha Evans now, who is going to give us a brief overview of what is trauma.
So in the few minutes that I have, I'm going to talk about what is trauma, the trauma response, and a little bit about brain science and how it applies to what we're doing. Trauma is the experience of serious adversity as well as the psychological and emotional response to that experience. There are various types of trauma. Acute trauma usually results from a single experience or event, such as a car accident or a natural disaster. Chronic trauma refers to repeated, prolonged trauma, and that would be things like, children witnessing domestic violence or themselves being the victim of child abuse or neglect. We have complex trauma, which is similar to chronic, but it's exposure to multiple and varied types of trauma, what we think of as multiple ACEs or adverse childhood experiences. Vicarious trauma is noteworthy as well. That is something that we as educators, service professionals are at risk for developing. That's the type of trauma that can develop as a result of witnessing or hearing or seeing another person's trauma. Also worth mentioning is toxic stress. So toxic stress doesn't necessarily isn't necessarily an event, but it's prolonged exposure to adversity. And when we think of poverty and racism, those are, create toxic stress, and they, example is poverty. We have housing instability, food insecurity. All of those things can trigger the trauma or the stress response, which is what I'm going to talk about next. So when we are threatened, our bodies activate a physiological response, and that usually results in our heart rate increasing, our blood pressure increasing, and our brains releasing various hormones, which then causes our adrenal glands to release cortisol. Now, when you have toxic stress, you have cortisol in the brain, swimming in cortisol for a prolonged period of time, and studies have shown that that results in disruption of brain circuits. It's noteworthy too, I keep saying noteworthy, that children's brains are particularly susceptible to chronic stress or the stress response. And children who've experienced multiple ACEs will end up sometimes with hypersensitive stress response systems, which means the smallest trigger will set them off, and even a perceived trigger can set them off. And the stress response can also be prolonged with children who've experienced multiple ACEs. Their brains are also affected by chronic stress. So there are studies and brain imaging studies that show that these children have decreased brain activities. Their cerebral cortex, or the prefrontal cortex, is decreased in volume. Their amygdala, which is the fight, flight, or response, or amygdala hijack organ, if you will, is enlarged because it's working over time. And finally, just looking at the brain, we see that the stress response is mediated by the limbic system, or what we call the emotional brain. And this is probably the most important point that I'm going to make in my few minutes, and that is when the limbic system is triggered or the stress response is triggered, the thinking brain goes offline. So let me repeat. When the limbic system is activated, the thinking brain goes offline, and the thinking brain is our prefrontal cortex, and that is the part of the brain that children use when we are talking about executive functioning skills. Kirsten, you're up.
Thank you, Asha. So I'm going to briefly learning and brain development to kind of provide a background for that before we move on to executive functioning skills. It's important because understanding the basics of brain development and how it impacts trauma allows us to better serve the children we work with who have experienced trauma or traumatic stress. So understanding these basics also helps adults understand what developmental stage a child is at so that our expectations and interventions are appropriate for the child. So one key concept for understanding brain development is the concept of the brain's neuroplasticity. Our brains develop and change in response to experience, maturation, and learning. And when you learn or experience something, your brain reorganizes itself by forming new or strengthening already existing neural connections between brain cells. And due to neuroplasticity, brain development is use dependent. So the brain develops in response to repeated input or patterns. When something is repeatedly experienced, the brain strengthens neural connections so that the brain's access to them is easier and faster. This concept applies to the experience of traumatic stress and traumatic stress response. So as Asha mentioned, when a child is experiencing traumatic stress, their response is much quicker to maybe lesser stimuli, and that's why some of our students may escalate to the extreme so quickly and due to seemingly small stimuli. Jenna, if you want to go to the next slide. Thank you. So when a child repeatedly experiences traumatic stress, the brain changes to aid in basic survival. So unfortunately, many of these neurological changes result in behaviors that are useful for survival, but prove maladaptive to successful functioning in our society. And this is backed by a lot of research and findings which associate complex trauma in childhood with negative outcomes and risks. And a brain stressed by trauma may also miss opportunities or be unable to master developmental tasks, which can result in core developmental deficits. And this includes not adequately developing neurocognitive competencies, which are responsible for building executive functioning skills. Do you want to go to the next slide, Jenna? Thank you. So a large percentage of Schenectady students have multiple adverse childhood experiences, also known as ACEs, or just one or two traumatic experiences. And based on what was just discussed about learning and the development of executive functioning skills, we can guess that there is a high potential that Schenectady has a large population of students with lagging executive functioning skills. So I have two main takeaways from this that I want you to remember. The first one is children and adolescents who have experienced trauma have lagging executive functioning skills. And the second takeaway I want you to know is that executive functioning skills can be improved with explicit teaching, modeling, and practice, which are the skills and the strategies that we are going to teach in this presentation. I am going to hand over to Jenna now.
All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. And thank you to my fellow panelists and our moderator, our lovely moderator. Thank you all for being here today. We really appreciate you sharing your time, expertise, and company with us. We're going to look or review a video. It's from Harvard University Center on the Developing Child. So just a reminder, if your video is still on, if you could turn that off, I will start the video now.
Science tells us that brains, minds, are built, not born. And at the center of this dynamic architecture are a set of skills called executive function and self-regulation.
Children's self-regulation and executive function are key ingredients in their lifetime performance. It's not just about learning language or learning numbers or learning colors. We have to be able to work effectively with others, with distractions, with multiple demands. These actually are skills that contribute to the productivity of the American workforce. Look at your shape. What should you have done next?
Educators, I think, are looking for just this sort of thing. And when we describe what we mean by executive function, they say, yes, that's it. That's exactly, the problem. These kids, they can tell me these rules, but they can't actually use them.
What's this? A toolbox. A toolbox.
What is executive function?
Probably the best way to think about it is sort of like an air traffic control system in the brain.
Just like an air traffic control system has to manage lots of airplanes going on, lots of runways, and really exquisite timing and so on. A child has to manage a lot of information, avoid distractions. We really think of it as involving working memory and inhibitory control and mental flexibility. Take a situation where a child is having to take turns. So first of all, child has to have inhibitory control. The child has to be able to stop whatever he or she is doing and let the other child take a turn. But when it's your turn again, you also have to remember what it is you're supposed to be doing. So that pulls on working memory. If the children who are taking the turns after you do something unpredictable, you have to be able to adjust what you're going to do next. And that requires mental flexibility. Children who are struggling with these capacities often look like children who just aren't paying attention, or children who are deliberately not controlling themselves.
If you don't have self-regulation, you act out and the teacher puts you in timeout, and so then you miss part of the learning that's going on, and then you are more upset because you're behind, and so you act out, and so you get this downward spiral.
How does executive function develop?
And +4.
In little children, and even in the infant and toddler years, you begin to see the roots of executive functioning skills. What's going on in our brains is unbelievably intricate and complicated. The prefrontal cortex, or the front third of the brain, is important for executive function. But it's more than just prefrontal cortex. This region doesn't act alone. It's involved in controlling your behavior through its interactions with all other parts of the brain. The brain goes from a situation where you've got nearest neurons communicating very strongly with each other and ignoring the rest of the brain, to these widespread networks that are connecting these different areas. Executive function changes over the life course. It improves radically over the first few years.
I got a match drive.
It continues to improve throughout adolescence. It's not until early adulthood that you have the adult type networks that are very strongly activated that connect different brain regions together.
Let's take notes.
Also, we believe that executive functions can be trained.
It's just like going to the gym. So the more you practice in these areas, the stronger the capacity is likely to become, because you're helping to strengthen those neural connections.
Mom, you're at 24.
Slowly but surely, you're going to be able to step back, and that child's going to go into the world with these skills where they get along with other people, change rules, and they can be flexible, and they can accomplish new things, and they're unafraid.
I got hit by my dog in my arm. Oh dear.
If we don't learn these skills during the childhood and adolescent years when they're coming online, we are really ill-equipped as an adult to hold a job, to maintain a marriage, to raise children, to get along with each other, to basically be part of a civil society.
You're okay.
Alrighty. Perfect. So this brings us to, you've heard many different things from my colleagues and from that video to let you know why executive functions are so important. But I'll reiterate this point a little bit further. So executive functioning skills are important for everyone, not just people who have experienced trauma. However, it's especially important for people who have experienced or continue to experience trauma, because we know that trauma affects this area of the brain. So executive functioning and building up those skills really allows us all to have active participation in our own life. Many times people who have experienced trauma or continue to experience trauma, their choices have been completely just taken away. Either they have absolutely no choice in their own life, or they have very minimal choice, or maybe two choices that really aren't so great that they have to pick from. So as we increase these executive functioning skills, we're allowing ourselves to have more active participation in our own life. They help us to bring more conscious thought to our actions rather than simply reacting. So that basically means is that I can slow down, think about any consequences that might come from my behavior. And when I say consequences, I don't mean negative consequences, negative, positive, neutral, whatever. But we can think about these things and make a choice rather than just simply reacting based on our survival brain. We increase our self-efficacy when we engage these executive functioning skills. A sense of agency over one's life is very important for a youth or just a person in general who has experienced trauma. So the primary really goal of this work in increasing our executive functioning skills within our students or the youth that we work with, we really hope to increase the youth's recognition of their ability to actively make choices. They all have this ability, but we need to teach a little bit more, right? And how to do this, or how this best fits in with their goals and their goals for their life to be successful in whatever that they choose. We'd really like to increase the youth's sense of empowerment and foster agency, so that self-knowledge that their actions can actually impact the world. We want to increase personal responsibility, so ownership of that decision-making and consequences. And then mastery, so the ability to implement these things, evaluate, practice, and own our personal actions and decisions. So just to sum this up, I think most of you probably know this doesn't happen overnight. Be patient. These things come with time. Just as I can't remember who said it, but just as changing our own behavior as adults, changing behavior, learning something new and incorporating it into our everyday is a really hard thing to do. So just knowing that these things come within time and that these are long-term goals we'd really like to work on. So let's move on. So we did hear a bit about what those executive functioning skills are from the video. But just to reiterate here is, again, we're mediated by the prefrontal cortex. You saw it sits right in here, the control tower of the brain, or sometimes the captain of the cognitive ship. So it's really important to know that these are many, many skills, encompasses so many things within these broad categories. There's many different models, many different strategies that address executive functioning skills that are not limited to what we're telling you today. However, these are some things that we've gathered throughout our work with youth who have experienced trauma and building up these executive functioning skills. So the way that I like to think about our executive functioning skills is that there's the hot or doing side of things, and then there's the cool or thinking side of things. So that hot is more of that effective motivational processing. The cool is more of that abstract, decontextualized processing or thinking. Okay, so inhibition of response, I'm not going to go too far into that one. It's, again, being able to stop, think about our behaviors, our actions, the situation that we're in, whatever consequences might come, and make a choice dependent on that. Emotion regulation. So I like to talk about this one. It's our ability to respond to ongoing demands of our experience with the range of emotions. So I think that people tend to go to this one thinking that emotion regulation is all negative, right? How do we manage those negative emotions? But emotion regulation also encompasses our ability to regulate positive emotions or excitement. Think about getting really excited. You have to regulate that so you can still perform or function how you're required to be functioning. So this all does not have to be, a negative experience. Set shifting. So set shifting is being able to move freely from one situation, activity, or aspect of a problem. The way I like to think about this one is if a teacher or whoever is up teaching to the class is writing on the board, the whiteboard, or whatever it might be, the ability to look at that board and whatever's writing, whatever writing is going on there, and then look down at my paper and write down something, that's a set shift. So just shifting in between aspects of things is a skill within the executive function. And then our cognitive flexibility. Our cognitive flexibility is just that ability to adapt to a change, while that mental shifting is more of the process that makes it possible. Fuller thinking, I'm going to go quickly over these because I would like to get to our strategies. I know we don't have too much time. Working memory, you heard about, it's the ability to hold that information forefront of the brain and then use it in a meaningful way. Planning is how to accomplish a goal. What steps do I need? Organization is the arranging of those steps to make sure you accomplish that goal. And then fluency is kind of retention of these skills, maintenance of a skill, and then generalization. So being able to use it in different situations is important. So just a note on that working memory before I move on, is something that sticks out to me. I was in a school out west, but we were, talking about, and this person that worked with this youth said he should be able to do this. He knows how to do this, right? So just be mindful here of the can't versus won't. So sometimes people, it seems like the student won't do something, but in reality, they might not have the skill to do it. We looked at this student who should have been able to do what this teacher was asking, and their working memory was in the first percentile. So they really did not have the skill to do that. So just being mindful of those things. So how can we support executive function? So this does not need to be a huge thing that we, sit down in the social worker's office and we work on executive functioning skills. These are best incorporated into everyday routines. That's how we learn to incorporate these things. So again, to remind you that these things encompass so many different skills. They overlap. But relationship building, having a safe, predictable, stable relationship with a safe adult is the most important piece of this. As we've heard mostly all day, youth do not learn from people that they do not have a relationship with. So thinking about that, building up those relationships first is going to be the most important piece of things. Typically, youth who have experienced trauma, when adult support is given, it typically feels like blame on the child or making that child feel like they did something terribly wrong. Why didn't you make this choice? Why would you do that? Why didn't you do X, Y, or Z, right? What choice should you have made? Well, sometimes they don't know, okay? So number one, we really would like to offer notice and name choices. Giving choices to our students, even relatively minor ones. So, bringing things up to the surface. Oh, I love how you made the choice to blow your nose when I was not talking so everyone else could hear. Things like that. And we really should be transparent about why certain things are not a choice. Being transparent is really important as well. A lot of times people who have experienced trauma, that predictability is just swept right out from underneath their feet. So building up predictability within our school environment is also very important. Observing and validating students' current choices, even if that choice was not one that you want the student to make or that you don't agree with or whatever. We need to first start by observing and validating the current choices, because how can we change if we already feel inadequate? And sometimes we validate that the reasoning behind the behavior, but not necessarily the behavior. So maybe, I think I understand why you walked away on your teacher during that conversation. It sounds like you were feeling angry, and I'm guessing you just needed to take a safe space to calm down. So we're understanding the reason behind some of these behaviors that we might see. And validating reasons maybe why it's sometimes hard to slow down. We normalize these things. Most of us have had a hard time using our thinking brain when we're upset or our emotions take over. We all act too quickly sometimes. Normalize these things. Use of curiosity is really important. This language of experimentation, we've been calling it. Being curious as to why we're doing what we're doing is important for us, but also the students that we work for or work with. So maybe I wonder what you might have been trying to communicate when you walked out of class, right? We're not saying, why'd you do that? But we're being curious about it, right? And helping students to be curious about their own choices. It's not blaming, it's not shaming, anything like that. An important point to note here too is that we want to be a facilitator of problem solving. We don't want to just hop right in and solve the problem for the student. That's not helping them learn how to do it themselves. So typically, I think a lot of us as helpers tend to go in and you know, solve the problem for the person, but that's not what our goal would like to be. So we also want to be able to, I think a classic, you know, kind of example we hear maybe a student say, I'm going to go punch this person in the face, or whatever the situation might be. I'm going to go fight this person, right? And maybe automatically our thoughts as adults or educators or whatever your role is in the school, you're like, oh, no way. No, don't go do that. Please don't, whatever, right? So as soon as someone tells you not to do something, you probably want to do it a little bit more. So let's then be curious and think about, well, what could happen if you did that, right? Just going through and being curious about what might happen, what might be the consequence, positive, negative, neutral, anything. Then we want to help the student identify the problem and the desired outcome. So again, with the student, not for them. So helping them to establish basic safety, knowing that there is a problem. Sometimes these executive functioning skills, we don't even know that there's a problem, right? So knowing that there's a problem and looking at all different outcomes, all different situations that could happen. We then want to help the student evaluate the effectiveness of the choices and consequences, but just again, exploring different consequences that can happen. So if then statements are really helpful here. If you do X, then Y might happen, or because you did X, then Y happened, right? So going through these different situations or brainstorming with the youth or student that you're working with can be very, very helpful as well. Number 6, co-regulating. So if you've been trained in the therapeutic crisis intervention in the schools, co-regulating is sometimes termed help me help myself. So this cannot happen if we're not regulated. As Tracy touched on in the beginning, if we are not modeling, you know, our emotions are calm and we're collected, how can we expect the youth that we're working with to be doing that? So ensuring that you're regulated and that you can manage your emotions is very important here. And if you can't, sometimes it's really hard, okay? Excuse me. Sometimes it's really, really difficult to manage your own emotions, and that's okay. So then maybe tag out, another person come in, right? But here also maybe noticing early signs of dysregulation in youth or the students that you're working with. And this comes along with that relationship building. I noticed your leg is bouncing up and down. Do you want to take a walk? Do you want to use your cards? Do you want to do X, Y, or Z? Whatever it might be. But you're mirroring that, or you're just noticing and simply reflecting for the student. But the co-regulation piece, we solve the immediate problem with the student, and then we later on can go into, you know, more advanced problem solving. Number 7 is practicing these strategies to delay response. Again, this doesn't have to be like I go to Miss Bodish's office and we practice these things. We can practice them as a class, right? So maybe all together, let's count to 10. Let's take a few deep breaths. Let's squeeze our hands together. Let's do whatever it might be, practicing some of these. And staging opportunities for developmentally appropriate play to learn skills. So play is a great way to learn, even for adults. But anytime we can incorporate play is awesome for these things. So like memory games, brain teasers, movement games, just being curious about these things. What's happening as we kind of go. Telling stories, anything like that. So I used to even I played like a mindfulness game with students at Steinmetz when I was there. And although they also love to, you know, be like tough and cool, they loved playing the games with me. So anytime you can incorporate play, it would be awesome. So some more concrete tools to strengthen executive function. Again, reminding you that there's so many different things out there. You can adapt any of these things, or kind of meet the needs of your students that are in front of you. I did also want to mention, I know that there's so many different people in here, but regardless of your position, you have experience and expertise that is valuable to our youth. So however this might fit in with your practice that you do. So setting expectations in all environments is very important to be curious about why we have these expectations or what they're rooted in. So special attention to trauma-focused lens and a culturally responsive anti-racist lens. Why are we asking students to do the things that we're doing? Are they necessary? But we also need to think about how we can't expect someone to do something that we didn't explicitly tell them to do. It lends itself to that idea of predictability. So I mentioned how people who have experienced trauma, basically, their sense of predictability within their environments has kind of been swept right out from underneath them. So being able to know what to expect or what to do to meet those expectations is really important for our students. And this is in every environment, lunchroom, hallway, wherever. Okay. Daily check-in. So the daily check-in, again, you can do this however kind of makes sense for your setting, but daily check-in could just be, hey, how are you doing? Could be, a scale that I'm gonna show you examples in just a moment. But I want to make the point that daily check-ins should not be mandatory. We shouldn't be forcing students to tell us how they feel. We shouldn't be forcing them to put how they feel up on the board or in a very public space if they don't want to. Of course, if they want to and make that choice, that's okay. But let me go into the examples I have here. This is from, and you'll get all the resources and references. This is from the incredible 5-point scale book. But sometimes just laying it out kind of on a hierarchy or a scale like this is really helpful for students or youth. And you can make this as, go up to high school or whatever the developmental stage is at, you can adapt this to them. But helping people understand kind of a level to notice these things can be really important. Let's see. Here's another example, and this is from the 5-point scale as well. So you can do it with anything. I've used it with students who personal space is an issue, and we put it on a scale. You can use this with kind of anything you want to put on a scale, and you don't have to use a 5-point. You can use 3 points, whatever it might be. Stress scale, I could lose control. Okay, not okay. I like this one a lot. I tend to use this one. What does it look like? What does it feel like? And what can I do? But laying those out, anytime someone has executive functioning lagging skills, using any visuals or things to kind of have the information in front of them is helpful. Let's see what else. Oh, these are just little minis. But again, I'm going to explode, I'm getting angry, I'm a little nervous, feeling okay, calm and relaxed. Social behavior mapping. Again, you can use, I've seen many different adaptations of this. You can use, again, whatever makes sense to you, but it's this idea of what's expected in the situation, how others might feel about what I do, how others might act or react based on how they feel about what I do, and then how I might feel based on how people are treating me. It's a little confusing, but it's really helpful for students with executive functioning deficits to be able to think through different situations. So it might not even be something that has happened, but just this can be used for that curiosity. What might happen? And then the same thing for that unexpected behavior, things that we might do that are seen as not appropriate for the situation. This is called SOCs. So situations, options, consequences, choices, strategies, simulations. Mouthful there. The SOCs worksheet, though, again, it's just another problem solving worksheet. What's your desired outcome? What's the situation? What are my options? What are the consequences of those options? What are my choices here? I'm going to pick an option and then I'm going to practice it. What happened when I practiced it? Or what could happen? And then follow up. Do we need to adapt? Do we need to choose something different? Again, can be adapted however you need to make it work. Okay. This is called a contingency map. It does not need to be, this positive and negative. Just wanted to use it as an example. Something happens, right? Up on the top, this is the situation. I act like this or I do this. And then this is the naturally occurring consequence. What happens after? Then the bottom, again, this person used it as a positive and negative. You don't have to do that. It could just be another behavior that you might display, another choice that you could make, and what happens after that. Sorry, oh. Thanks for hanging in there with me. Our problem solving map. So just another way to lay out this information and make it, more digestible for people who might have these executive functioning skills. What do I need? What does my teacher, or parent, or guardian need? What are some solutions that we can agree on? Mapping out for I'm mad because whatever reason, what do I choose to do? And what happens afterward? Ooh. Sorry. There we go. Okay. And then we have the size of the problem. So the size of the problem, I want to be mindful here. It can be helpful to lay these out and what might be the socially acceptable response for a problem that you see in your situation. However, I want to be mindful here with, a problem that our student has or has a big reaction to that we might not understand is a big problem for them, even if it's perceived, even if it's not what we think. It could be a very, very, very real problem to this student or youth. So just keeping that in mind as we kind of go through this learning. What else do I have? I'll have the think sheets, but I think I'm going to go back to this really quick. So checklists, these are really great to use. Again, with that working memory, having a checklist of what I need to do or whatever it might be. It doesn't have to be what you need to do, but using those checklists to keep you on track, things like that. Self-monitoring is just being able to, take a moment. Oh, what am I doing right now? How am I feeling? Did I meet all the expectations that my teacher had? It's essentially just allowing the time for the youth to process the self. And using the 5 senses, that's really important in establishing safety, right? Dan Siegel, who is a psychiatrist, yes, a medical doctor, he labels our 6th sense as our body. So using those things to establish safety or just understand what's going on in our environment can also be very helpful. And then the think sheet I'll go over really quick. Kirsten has used this within the setting of Schenectady City Schools. So I'll actually let her talk very briefly about this and then we can move on.
Thanks, Jenna. I just wanted to touch on this very quickly. I know that we are running out of time, but the think sheets are a great way to build skills in having children and students evaluate the choices that they made so that they can build skills for making better choices in the future and being able to think for themselves. And this should be a collaborative process. It is not to be done by themselves. And to meet children where they are at developmentally, it is perfectly okay to encourage drawing instead of writing some answers.
Thank you, Kirsten. And just to finish up here, I did just want to mention that, you know, the use of restorative practices, TCIS, so the life space interview, co-regulation, but also collaborative problem solving can also be used within this as well. So I will pass off to Tracy now.
Fabulous. Thank you, Jenna. We're going to ask that you answer the following questions in the chat, and we can share this information with you as well. What are strategies that worked well for your students last year in whatever your capacity is? And after hearing about some of these strategies that Jenna was outlining, are there new strategies that you plan to use more often when school resumes this fall? Give you just a moment to think about that. And Jenna, while folks are doing that, so strategies that worked well for you, strategies you might use more when we return in just under a month. If we can go on to the next slide, I wanted to talk a little bit about a strategy that we will share with you. So make sure that you send us your email address so that we can share resources with you either later today or sometime tomorrow, all the links for this presentation. So this is based off of just a version of something that came out of the ARC model as a recommendation for strengthening executive functioning. So it would be an activity, we made one up called Stranded in the Adirondacks, where we're trying to strengthen problem solving, negotiation, use of I statements, and conflict resolution with students. You could do this for a full classroom and break students into small groups. You could do this as a small group activity if you're working with a smaller group of students, or something similar to this. Can you flip to the next slide, Jenna, please? So you would provide the students with a list of items. So we said 5 items. It could be 10 items. It could be 8 items that are things that they could bring with them if they were going to go to the Adirondacks. And as you're looking at it, you're probably picking out items that, you know, if I'm going to be there for and staying in the Adirondacks, these are things that I would want to have with me. But the problem is you have to agree on those 5 items or 10 items as a group. So as the group is coming up with this and negotiating and finding their voices, we throw in a wrench and say, okay, you just found out that there's going to be a torrential downpour and you are going to be stranded for 2 days. How does that change the items that you're going to bring? And then having the students negotiate together, what could they be bringing? This could be done differently for an older group, but I could see late elementary, middle school, high school doing an activity similar to this and being able to negotiate that. Whereas a younger group, it might be, okay, there's 5 of you, you can only play with 3 toys at your kindergarten table together. These are toys that take 2 people. Here are things that you play with alone. How can you structure this so if you can only pick 3 toys for the group, everyone gets to play? So I mean, you can move this around in many different ways as an activity. And you can throw additional wrenches into things. So you could say, okay, well, let's say the forecast changed, now it's going to be snow. Or now you know there's a bear in the woods, would you need different items? So there's a lot of ways you can play with this as a fun interactive that doesn't have to take additional time. This doesn't have to be a half-hour thing. You could do this in 5-10 minutes, and you could build on it over the course of a week, use the same idea as sort of a fun break that also keeps them active and thinking. So for ours, if we can flip to the next slide, we had come up with 5 items that could be used. We could bring raincoats, a tent, protein bars, a heat reflective blanket, and a flashlight. But it could be 5 other things, or it could be 10 other things. It's whatever working together the group would come up with. I know we're running out of time. If we can flip, we will share these resource slides that are coming up. Jenna's going to show those to you. And we will share our references. So there's our further information. We will share this with you. There's, I think, one more of these for additional resources. I think all of you have our email addresses that were shared in the chat. Here are our references. And feel free to email us if you do put your email in the chat. We will share the information with you directly through your apps account. And lastly, focus on progress, not perfection. Thank you so much for coming to our presentation. We will stick around for a few minutes if there's additional Q&A. I didn't see any popping up while I was on. But we do want to honor your time because we know there's another session that you need to get to.
Yes, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We will stay on within this session. You have a 15-minute break, and Dr. Rios will be starting promptly at 1:45 p.m. The topic being culturally responsive approaches for reaching students through remote teaching. Thank you and so much, and have a great day.
I saw a question about getting the emails. You can send it in the